In June 2023, I found out that I was going to be a dad. This journey begun before I met my best friend and fiancé, Connie. At the age of 26, I was lost, I was wrestling with depression and anxiety, and I was desperately searching for meaning in my life. Selfishly, I asked some of the key people around me the biggest question of all: why am I here and what is this all about? I understand now that ultimately everybody has to answer that question for themselves. I'm excited to be a dad. I know that I'm going to face challenges along the way, but overwhelmingly, I can't wait for that journey and the next adventure. And this is my story. I know in years to come, I'm going to look back at the year 2019 and think it was probably one of the most valuable in my whole life. At the time, while I was living it and going through it, it was probably the hardest. I'd been taken off the British team. I was completely lost. I moved in with my grandparents. I was really struggling with my mental health. I got diagnosed with depression, anxiety. I had a neck issue that meant that I wasn't sleeping. And at the end of that year, after I'd been in therapy, I ended up fracturing both of my ankles. But at the end of that year, something incredible happened, and I met Connie. And things began to change from that moment on. But during that time, I can remember feeling, like I said, incredibly lost, and I had a conversation with my uncle. I can remember visiting him. It was that summer. I'm struggling with all these emotions. I'm not really understanding what's happening to me. I'm questioning everything in my life. I'm questioning my gymnastics, my career, who I was, my personality, the people around me, what I was doing this for, why I was here, asking all of these massive questions. And I didn't change tactic, and I asked him the same thing. So I went to visit him. He lived near Manchester in a place called Todmerton. And my uncle was a really interesting person to ask these big questions to, because he had done life in many ways in a very different way. You know, society kind of tells you to have a house, find your partner, have a child, get married. And in his mid-20s, he traveled the world. He was a musician. So he'd grown up. I actually remember talking to my granddad once and him saying, your Uncle Mitch was so different when he was younger. I often thought that he was gay. I remember laughing at him and going, and he said, there's nothing wrong with that, but he was just so odd, and he was always doing things differently. He wasn't like your dad. He didn't play football. He loved to drum. He loved to do music. To my granddad, that was quite alien because, he was from this farming world, this building world, this football world. And he'd tell me stories of how he started drumming my granddad had a farmhouse, and he'd let him use the farmhouse and put his drum kit there because he was annoying all the neighbours, so he could carry on with his drumming. And he went on to travel the world. He went around India, went all across Australia, New Zealand. And I vaguely remember it and remember the stories that my granddad would tell me. And I remember there's pictures of him in my granddad and my grandma's house. And they would tell us about his adventures because he would write home. It was before social media days. So he would post letters home and they'd tell me about it. And he always lived this cool, interesting, exciting life. And he went on to be a musician. And, he's performed with Jerry and the Pacemakers. They're a big band that sung You'll Never Walk Alone. And he's done big gigs. He did gigs for the London 2012 Olympics. He's got lots of bands now, gigs all across the country, does these big things. And he had kids very much later on in his life. He decided to have a child. And he had a son called Frankie. He was born, and he was close to 50. He's in his 50s now, my uncle. And he was a really interesting person for me to ask this question to, because I was basically asking him, why am I here? And I had this underlying suspicion that the reason I was here was to have a family of my own and have children of my own. But what was really confusing for me was that was kind of like what society said you should do. And this is a person that's gone about it a completely different way. He's lived a whole life. He's gone off traveling, being a musician, in many ways doing a career like I did, where, it's quite selfish, right? Like everything was about me. Everything was about my skill and what I wanted to do and to entertain people. And he had gone off and done this. And, he'd met his partner pretty young, and she was a musician as well. So their life worked for them. And I can remember walking around this park with him, and he had Frankie at this point. And I can remember saying, Uncle Mitch, I'm really struggling with my mental health, my depression, my anxiety. I'm completely lost. Like, why do you think we're here? What a big question to ask somebody. And we walked around this park. And I can remember, I think it was probably the end of summer. It was like an autumn day. It wasn't necessarily warm or cold outside. And we were walking around this park, and he said, "Look, Sam, I can't really answer that for you. You have to find that answer for yourself. I've found a lot of meaning now in, having Frankie, but that's not always been the case. And, there's no set way of doing things. But, that's a real big question you're asking me. You need to kind of find that out for yourself." And, I asked a few other people the same question. And I think around that time, at 26, I really started for the first time to put other things first, other than just my career. It wasn't even just me, because I certainly didn't put myself first. Everything came second to my gymnastics career. And my gymnastics career at that point had become all about, I had to go to the Olympics and I had to try and win this medal to justify the sacrifices and the pain that I'd been through, which is no way to live your life, right? It wasn't even because I was doing it because I wanted to achieve this incredibly positive thing that was going to be really inspirational and it was just for me. It wasn't that. It was because I'd been through so much pain and I was trying to justify that pain and suffering and sacrifice and those feelings that I had right then with this gold medal. It had to be worth something, right? And I started to kind of strip that back for the very first time and put my family first, put myself first, physically and mentally. And that was really hard. That was quite alien for me to do. Now, at the end of that year, I met Connie. And when I met Connie, that changed everything. It was the first time, it was the first big thing that came along in my life where I said, I'm going to commit to this and put this first over my gymnastics career. And I did that, and we got into our relationship, and it was amazing in the beginning. And I was still doing gymnastics at the time. And, as I started to really struggle with my mental health again during the COVID time, and that really turned up a notch and got probably to its very worst, is when I naturally started to think about being a dad and talking to Connie about, imagine if we started a family one day. And Connie had always wanted to be a mom, right? And, I think it's probably not until that point in my life, but I really thought about it because it became a possibility for the first time. For the first time I found someone that I wanted to build a life with and I could see a future with. And so I started to think about it. And in those early days, when I would talk about it and think about it, my biggest real concern was, I remember saying to her one day, we'd gone to maybe Beaver Castle to walk around, just gone out for the day. And I remember saying to her, I'm really worried that I'm not going to be able to have kids because I don't trust that my mental health is going to be stable enough that, we throw a child into the mix, I might fall back into that space that I've been in where I've reached the bottom and I've been, struggling so much with my mental health that I don't want to be here anymore. And that frightens me. And I don't think, because I'm so worried of that risk and that happening again, I don't think that I can take the risk of having a child and putting them in the position of having a dad that's going to struggle with that. That was my real big anxiety around being a dad initially. But I also knew at the time that was still a few years away. There were lots of steps that me and Connie had to go through in our relationship to get to that point, but it became something that I wanted to do with her. She was going to be that person I built my life with. And, I carried on that journey of figuring myself out, and I think that was really important. And actually, the idea of being a parent helped me deal with my own mental health issues and put myself first, because I was like, I want to be a person that is dependable again, and I want to be able to trust myself to be able to handle bringing a child into the world. And actually, me understanding this is going to be really, really important for that. So that was a real big fear, I think. And I almost in many ways had to deconstruct the framework that I'd kind of built my life upon. And the way I think about this was almost like you've got a house and you've got all of this kind of scaffolding all around this house that's been put around this house. And me, the person, the foundations were there, but I had to take the scaffolding off piece by piece, get back down to the very bottom, start at the bottom and build up again. And that's what I started to do. And I did that with Connie, and it was a team effort. And I think when we probably got to last year, the first time that, we had talked about, and I joke all the time that Connie asked me if we could have a baby every day for the last 2 years before we found out we were going to be parents. And I wanted that too, but I knew that there were certain things that I had to kind of put in place, and I needed to make sure that I was definitely ready and it was the right time for me, and mentally I was in a good place. And I needed to have the evidence that I'd had a long period of time without really struggling with my mental health, and the fact that I needed to know that I was going to be able to manage that if I was going to handle having a baby, because that's a big thing, right? Uh, I've heard people say before that when you become a parent is when you really become an adult, because there's somebody that you are solely responsible for. And, when you're in a relationship with someone, that is the case to a degree, but they still have to look after themselves, right? But a baby, when a baby's there, they literally can't take care of themselves unless you take care of the baby. So for me, it was important that I kind of went on this journey to make sure that I was ready for that. But I think at the start of 2022, I started coaching, and there was a group that I used to work with, and it was a group of girls, and they were like 7 or 8 years old. And it was the first time in my life, and I think this was in part down to the fact that I didn't necessarily spend much time with my sisters when they were growing up. And again, this comes back to the selfish thing. And, I've had a lot of athletes come on and share their stories on the podcast now. And I had a conversation with an athlete that we've just interviewed, and we were talking about how now he's got a different perspective. He's towards the end of his career, and, he wants to put more emphasis on the other areas in his life and his family and his partner, and he's going to have a baby. But when he was younger, it wasn't that way. It was, everything was about gymnastics. Every decision was about his career and aiming for this next goal, this next thing, this next medal. And I was the same. And I had to I think that at that young age, you have to be that way if you want to be a successful athlete. There's kind of no other way of doing it. I don't think you would, his story was so incredible. He's had so many injuries, and he ended up going on to become a world champion. I almost think he had to be in that mindset to be successful. And actually, if he had the perspective he has at the end of his career, back when he was 20, 21, he maybe wouldn't have got through some of those setbacks. And I think it's probably the same for me. I had to get to that point in my life where I was ready to put other people and a partner and a life ahead of my gymnastics. And I got to this point with Connie, and I'm starting to coach this group of girls, and it was the first time that I worked with these girls. I was like, oh my God, this would be amazing to have one of these. This would be really cool. Like, wow, God, these are great. And they had such big little personalities, and I developed this little bond with them. Most of the time I wasn't coaching them. I was just talking about school and what they've been up to, and like we had these handshakes that we would do. I've had different handshakes with all of them, and I go home and I tell Connie about what we learnt this week and what they're up to, and it was dead exciting. I loved it, and it was the first time I thought, God, I'd really like to be a dad, I think. And I think initially, like, that's probably where I really wanted a little girl. That's where that came from. I think it was working with those girls because they had such big personalities, but I also feel that it was because I had missed that time with my sisters, because I was fully in gymnastics mode and my career mode, and time flies by, and before I knew it, my sister went from being 6 or 7 years old and she's now 19, and my older sister, those teenage years, I just wasn't there. And it was because I was away traveling, training, and look, that's the way it's supposed to be when you're young, right? But I think because I missed out on that, I really felt like I'd like a second chance at being there for a daughter. That'd be amazing. So we go away, and, I think, I spoke about my fear of fatherhood and the mentality side of it. I think I really struggled with initially, worrying about what was my headspace going to be like. And, I talked about going to Knots and working in that girls group, and this all coincided with us going away traveling, and we went away traveling. That was one thing I really wanted to do before I decided to sit down and have kids. And I think Connie had worked out pretty early on that I was putting these speed bumps in the way. So a couple of years ago, we wanted a dog, right? So Connie really wanted a dog because, you do the house, you do the dog, you get engaged, you get married, you have a baby. It's kind of like an order of things that you do. And there's a lot of societal pressure around you, whether you're a man or whether you're a woman, to kind of tick these things off. And as you get older, people start asking, oh, are you going to get engaged yet? Or you thought about children? I got a lot of that from my family. Like my mum's desperate to be a grandma. And I think, I'm not sure who was worse, Connie or my mum, for asking every day. And we kind of like got to this point where I wanted to travel, and she'd figured out that a dog was another speed bump I'd put in the way. So she very quickly decided that having a dog and a baby is not a good thing. It's not safe. So we'll get rid of a dog. I was like, right, the last one that I've got is traveling. So we went away traveling, and we traveled, and we had an amazing time for 4 months. But it gave me a lot of time to sit back and reflect. And At this point, we really were talking about starting a family, and we kind of had it in our head, like, when we get home, we're probably going to think about starting a family. And, at that time, it's almost, it's kind of real, but it's not real because I'm not facing it yet. And we get back into January, and the next hurdle for me to overcome, and in my head, I'm thinking, right, I'm going to go freelance. It's a little bit of a risk. I've not got that security of a wage. I need to make sure that I spend at least the first 6 months of the year giving it a shot and knowing that I'm going to be able to financially support a family if we decide to do this. So, we get started, we come back, and yeah, it's interesting, when you're, for me anyway, and I don't know whether this is because I quit school in year 9, right? So I never had my sex education classes in year 10 or year 11, but I think as a young man, for me personally, I was quite ignorant to a lot of things that, women have to deal with, whether that's periods, menstrual cycle, whether it's the pressure that they've got on them, that they've got a time window to have children. You don't really think about them. I didn't, in my situation as a guy, until you start to try and have children. And then it becomes very real. Whereas, like, Connie's been thinking about that probably since she was a teenager. But for me as a guy, until that was like real and I was going to decide to try and start a family, I never thought about that. I really didn't understand it. To be honest, this is how in the dark I was. I genuinely thought when I was younger, if you have a one-night stand and you don't protect yourself, you'll get somebody pregnant. Whereas now I know that actually there's only a small window of opportunity, and actually it's really difficult to get pregnant. And when we started, I started to stress out a little bit because I'd done gymnastics my whole life, right? And gymnastics is a sport where you're wearing a tight leotard, and I'd literally fell off the high bar maybe 10 times every day right onto my stomach. And at times you smash yourself in the crown jewels section. And I genuinely was like, what if I might struggle to have kids? Look, when I was growing up and I was in gymnastics, right? I'm really short for my age. I'm really small. There's like it's almost like a urban myth in gymnastics that everybody says gymnastics stunts your growth, right? So I'm like, the first time we start trying to have kids, start trying to have a child, and we talk about it and becomes a thing, I'm panicking like, can I have kids? Whereas I imagine as a girl, and as a female, and as a woman, Connie's been having that conversation for years. And I was just completely unaware of that until that moment we started. And that was a pressure. And I started to have conversations with my friends that had kids and said, how long does it take for you to like have a child? Like, what's that process like? Because it's not something you talk about. Like, I can see Sam like laughing behind the camera. It's like a taboo thing. You don't talk about those things, Like, as a guy and a girl, there's certain conversations that don't take place. And that's certainly one of them. Like, I've never asked a lad, well, how long does it take to have a baby? I had no idea. I was new to this, I was very naive. And I spoke to some of my mates at football who had children recently, and they said, look, for everybody it's different. It can take a long time. It's quite a lot of pressure. It was like quite stressful. I struggled with that. And, you're both like panicking, like, how long is it going to take us? Are we going to be able to have kids? Straight away, like Connie's on the internet, Googling things, worst thing to do. You're on TikTok, because all you're ever going to do is the extreme, the two ends of the scale. You're either going to hear from people that managed to conceive on the first time of trying, or people that it's taken 2 years, or they're 3, 4, 5, 6 years in and they can't have children. So yeah, that was really difficult in the beginning. I spoke to friends, I found out that the average was about 6 months, but we were very lucky, it didn't take us too long. And when I found out, it was an amazing feeling. Connie woke me up, it was a morning. She woke me up, she said, I think we're pregnant. So it was, I just jumped up. I was like, really? I couldn't believe it. And then, I think she must have talked about, 5 or 6 tests. She didn't believe it. And actually, when we went for our first 12-week scan, she even took a test the night before our 12-week scan because she didn't believe that we were pregnant still. It was really surreal in the beginning. I didn't know what to expect. We went for we rang the midwife. I was like, what do we do? No one tells you. It's a bit like, and it's a different situation, but it's a bit like when we first got a house. I thought there was going to be like a group of people, probably my family, that were going to like sit me in a room and go, right, this is how it works. This is how you get a mortgage. This is what you need to do. Like, but nobody does that. You just got to figure it out by yourself. And I was like, right, do we have to call a midwife? What do we do here? And we called the midwife, arranged an appointment, went in. It was weird. It was very surreal. I found it very difficult in the beginning, and I still do a little bit. I have to kind of keep reminding myself, you're going to be a dad. You're going to be a dad, because it's really hard, right? There's no baby growing inside of me, and to an extent, my life hasn't changed so much. Whereas Connie's has, like, her body's changing and she feels different, and she's struggling massively with morning sickness. And we go for our 12-week scan, and, at that point, again, first time, you see the baby, and it was incredible. Like, we saw the baby on the screen, I'm just smiling, beaming, my face is like this. I can't believe it. And I'm looking at Connie, and we're both seeing our baby for the first time. It still doesn't feel real. And, she says the baby's healthy. They do lots of measurements. You can decide whether you want to do a test where they test your baby to see whether potentially they might have Down syndrome and a few other things. Again, I had no idea about this until we started trying to have a baby, and you get all this information coming at you at once. And as the dad, you don't really know what you're supposed to. You're just trying to support the mom, and you're also like struggling with these feelings. And yeah, it's a really interesting time. It's difficult for both of you, but like it's also amazing. And I think, we're 18 weeks this week. We've found out the gender of our baby, so we found out we were going to have a little boy. I was convinced we were having a little girl. Connie was convinced we were having a little girl. It's completely thrown us. We had like a girl's name set for about 12 months. We knew exactly what we were going to call it if it was a girl. And then, on that day we found out, we're going to have a little boy, which was a massive shock. So for me, it's actually been really interesting. I was super nervous beforehand to have a boy. I've been really nervous about that. I think, number one, I feel like I was a bit of a nightmare when I was a kid. So if it's anything like me, I'm like really worried for Connie. I never slept. I was naughty. I was high energy all the time, always like breaking rules and pushing the boundaries. So that stresses me out quite a bit. And I think the second thing was as well, like, I feel like just naturally, if I have a boy and I'm the dad, there's certain responsibilities that fall upon me in terms of, things that I'm going to have to teach him, and certain responsibilities that will be different to the mom. So that, I think I felt quite nervous and a bit of pressure. And so I was thinking, a girl will be easier because, there's certain things that Connie will be responsible for more if it's a little girl. But actually now, since I found out, I'm completely relaxed and I'm excited. And if anybody, the person that's best placed to help if they're anything like me is me, right? And that was in part why I did the ADHD assessment as well recently. I knew that I wanted to try and be a dad, and that was kind of the last thing I needed to tick off personally to kind of like figure out about myself in case I did have a child that might go on to have ADHD or now the OCPD like me. I wanted to understand that deeply. And so we found that out. We found out we're having a little boy, and at the moment, the baby's healthy. It's certainly not been easy. Like I said, Connie's been struggling massively with morning sickness. So 3% of women struggle with something called HG. HG is the abbreviation. I can't say the whole name, but it's basically severe morning sickness. Now, that might stay for the whole pregnancy, or it might go away, but it means that, we had no reference point in the beginning. It's our first child, and also, again, just as a guy, and also for Connie as well, she knew nothing about this. You hear the word morning sickness and you go, oh, the morning, you're going to be sick, right? Just what it says on the label, but actually you can be sick at any point in the day. And the problem, I think, was that because we didn't have any point of reference, we thought it was quite normal how much that Connie was being sick, because she would be sick every single day. And actually it got to a point about 3 weeks ago where she was threw up like 20 times in the morning, and the next day like 15 times. And we ended up in hospital, and then we found out that she has this thing called HG, which means that if she gets really sick and she can't keep down fluids and food, obviously at that point it can become dangerous for the baby. So we've been in twice now, and she's been on an IV drip, and they've got loads of fluids in her. She gets an injection, an anti-sickness injection, and we've played around with the medication a little bit. And that the latest time we went into hospital and we went through that process, this time the medication seems to be working, so she's been much better this week. But that's something we're managing and dealing with. It's been quite hard at times, She was at work beforehand and nobody knew that she was pregnant, so they were expecting her to fill out her normal responsibilities without knowing she was pregnant and tired and struggling with this morning sickness. Certainly helped now people know. But yeah, that's something that we're going to have to manage, and has been quite challenging. And we're also trying to really, at times she feels really unwell and she's tired. Like every woman does during a pregnancy. We're trying to really appreciate and enjoy it at the same time, which is quite hard to do. And it's really easy for me, the guy that's not got the morning sickness and doesn't have the baby growing inside me, to say, come on, you've got to enjoy it as well. But yeah, we're doing that, and we're super happy. I think the real positives have been that, for me, even at this early stage, it's given me like a new, I'm not going to say the cliche new lease of life, but it's certainly given me a level of motivation that's been really cool, particularly with, starting my own business and feeling under pressure a little bit and having to do a lot by myself and build whatever it is that I'm doing. That's really helped. And when there's a situation where I'm like, I've got to ring this person and I'm quite nervous to have that conversation, or I've got to invoice somebody for this, or I've got to ask for this amount of money, it's a lot easier now that I know that I'm going to have a baby, because I say to myself, come on, you're going to have a baby now. Like, you've got to do it for them as well. And it makes it a lot easier to push myself outside of my comfort zone and get that across the line. That's massively helped with me. It's also just awesome. I remember sitting in the jeweller's when I got the engagement ring for Connie when I proposed to her. And I can remember saying to the lady that was sorting me out that day, I remember saying to her, I'm just so happy that I'm at this point in my life. I know to have got to this point in my life where I've found somebody that I want to spend the rest of my life with, and I'm going to make this commitment to. Like, I've been through a lot, and it's amazing to be at this point, because some people never ever get to this point. And I just feel the same way. It's been amazing to get to this point where I feel ready to be a dad, and Connie feels ready to be a mom, and we feel ready to start a family. Like, especially because of what I've been through in the last few years, and the point that I was at. Like, I sit back now and I'm so grateful that I've got the life that I've got. I'm just so happy all the time. It's been an incredible piece of perspective, finding out that I'm going to be a dad. Like, it's really helped just melt problems away that really aren't problems, things that stress me out. When I'm getting really stressed and I'm struggling and I'm feeling like I'm under a lot of pressure, I kind of every now and then just stop and say, hey, you're going to be a dad. And it just kind of melts it away a little bit, which is an amazing thing. And I'm sure that that feeling just grows stronger the closer you get, and certainly when you get to meet your baby for the first time. Now, I also am aware that, this is still quite an early stage, and I've had experiences within the family of people miscarrying, and I know that is a possibility. So it's a really weird thing when you're having a baby, and I don't think that ever goes away. And I actually had this conversation with my dad, and my dad actually, it's interesting, like, my dad never really talks about this, but he said, yeah, that fear, mate, never really went away until, like, I saw you for the first time. And the same with my brothers and sisters. He said, you've always got that kind of like fear in the back of your head. You just want everything to be okay and the baby to be healthy. And yeah, you do. You kind of get wrapped up in we're having a baby, we're going to have a boy, and people are buying you gifts, and it's dead exciting. And then every time you go for a scan or something, you have that little thing in your head. The 2 times we've been into hospital, what if it's not okay? What if something's wrong? So all the time you just want to hear, yeah, baby's healthy. But I'm enjoying this process and this journey so far. I still ask the big question, and I've been doing that probably for the last 18 months, but the question's changed a little bit. And whenever I get the chance and I'm with another dad, whether it's a friend or somebody I've never met before, I do this quite often, they must think, God, this guy having another deep conversation. I've just met him and he's asking me what it's all about. But whenever I get the chance, whether it's in the sauna and I meet someone and they're a dad, I say, I'm just going to take this opportunity while I've got it. Like, what would you say is the most important piece of advice you would give somebody who's on that journey to becoming a new dad? And they kind of all go about it a different way, but they seem to give me the same answer, and the answer that always comes back is time. They always say time, and I've put a huge emphasis in my life over the past 12 months, 18 months. I'm trying to build a career. I've gone freelance. I said no to a potential career path in the traditional route of coaching gymnastics because I want to be there. I want to build a family, and I know that I want to be there every evening when they're not at school. I want to be there on the weekends. I want to do things with them. I want to give them my time, I've seen enough in life now to know that, shiny objects and accolades and medals, it doesn't really mean much. But really being able to give people your time is the most important thing. And I think that's really important, when you've got kids, is being able to be there for the good stuff and the bad stuff, and really give them your time, be in the room, It's really funny. I remember the old head national coach that I had when I was a gymnast. used to say this phrase, be in the room. And what's quite ironic was a lot of the time he wasn't really in the room. And Sergey, with his limited level of English, used to say it to me all the time. And I can remember when the phrase came out, they meant like, you shouldn't be on your phone when you're training. You need to fully be focused on gym. And Sergey would be on his phone all the time, but he'd always like look at me and say, hey, Sam, be in the room. And I'd be like, Serg, you're not in the room. You don't know what that means. But I really want to be in the room. I want to be there, you know. I don't want to be distracted. I want to give them as much possible time as I can. So that's a big thing for me. I think the values, that's probably one that I like worry about. I'm like, oh God, you know, my children, my child might not necessarily struggle financially, and you know, now like kids want the latest iPhone, laptop, they want to do all these different sports activities, it all costs money, and like as a parent, I don't know it yet because I've not experienced it, but I'm sure you want the very best for your kids, right? And it's like, how do I instill those values that my parents taught me in a world where everything's quick? And that is a big concern of mine. And I asked that question to other dads, and you know, I think it's probably going to be all about, you know, focusing on the right things and placing the value on the right things. And that's going to be something I'm sure I'll struggle with. I might have an answer now for you, but I'm sure I'd give a very different one in 5 years' time. So that's the values and principles. That's something that's really important to me. I think I'm certainly it's going to be difficult to not let them make mistakes. I think as a parent, you don't want your kids to feel the pain that you feel, right? And you know, I'm certainly going to try and discourage them from making some of the big mistakes that I've made in my life. But I do think equally it's very important that they make their own mistakes and you let them make their mistakes, and in order for them to grow, and they've got to learn, right? You've got to be burnt by the fire to know it burns you. And I think that's probably important. That's one thing I have on my mind. And I think the main thing is being present, you know. Like I try and practice that all the time in my life. It's something that I don't get right all the time. You know, I have little rules in my life, you know. For instance, now I don't go on social media before 9 o'clock in the morning, and I don't go on it after 5 o'clock at night. And I try to stick to that. I try not to check my emails over the weekend. I only watch YouTube on my TV and my laptop. I don't watch it on my phone. And all of these things are trying to keep me as present as I can be, you know, to detach myself from my phone, you know, in preparation for having a baby and being able to be there as much as I possibly can, because it's hard. It's hard right now, you know, like it's tough. A lot of the stuff that I do a lot of my work and I sort my business out, and it's on my phone or it's on my computer. And, you know, working for yourself is tough because it's almost 24 hours a day unless you really set those strict parameters. And I'm trying to do that now in preparation for having a baby and a child. The amazing thing about being freelance is that you've got that flexibility. You know, I don't take that for granted. It's going to be amazing, you know, being able to take a morning off or an afternoon off and structure my work around the life I'm building is something that I want to do. I know it's quite difficult, and I do know that when that time comes and the baby arrives and Connie's on maternity leave, there's going to have to be some sacrifice, and I'm going to have to probably work more, and I'm going to have to be away. And I think actually one thing this experience has taught me, it's given me a real appreciation for my dad. And I think I started to appreciate the job that my dad did and how amazing he has been as a father through my granddad passing away and their relationship, and seeing that bond, and really seeing that, like, at the end of my granddad's life, you know, my granddad was in his 80s, my dad's now in his 50s. He was still just my dad's dad. You know, he almost went into that childlike state again a lot of the time. And, you know, I'm going to be that way with my dad, and my little boy is going to be that way with me. It sounds weird when I say little boy. It sounds amazing. I still keep saying to Connie sometimes, like, I keep saying, you know, when we have kids, and she's like, please stop saying that. You're having a kid. I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. And so I know that I'm going to have that with my son as well. And, you know, my dad was an incredible dad, and he did everything for us. And it's now that I really, you know, it's a bit like, I imagine, like when I first left home, my appreciation levels for my mum and dad and everything they did in the house and how expensive everything was and the efforts that they went into for, like, washing my clothes, ironing my clothes, all of those small things. When you move home for the first time and you have your own responsibilities, you really appreciate, God, wow, that's tough. And then you come back and then you kind of start governing your siblings and saying, do you know how much that costs? Do you know how hard your parents work? It's really interesting when that happens. And I imagine it's going to be the same thing when I become a dad for the first time and I see my baby. And I'll have a greater appreciation for the job that they did, and they did an amazing job with me, and Connie's parents did an amazing job with her, and we're very lucky that we have this amazing life with incredible people around us, and they're going to support us. And it's going to be tough at times. I know that. It's going to be challenging. There's going to be things that we get wrong. I'm completely prepared for that. I know that, I'm not going into this thinking we're going to get everything right. I know we're going to make mistakes. I'm going to embrace them. But more than anything, I'm just excited. I'm so happy I'm at this point in my life. The only thing that matters is that the baby is healthy and Connie's healthy. But it's just an exciting chapter. I've got lots of friends around me, the same age, that are also having children. That's super exciting. There's literally there must be close to a dozen of my friends that are having kids right now, and they're all going to be in the same year group, which is really cool. So I'm going to be able to go through this process at the same time as them. I've got a couple of friends that are on to their second child, which is super exciting. So they'll be able to help me. But more than anything, it's just going to be the coolest chapter in my life. Like, I genuinely believe that, like, everything I've been through in my life so far is to prepare me for this. And I'm super excited. It doesn't mean, that for me, I got to the answer of that question, I think. And I'm sure I'll know that the first time that I see my son. That will probably be the final cherry on the top to that answer of why am I here? And this is what it's about, to take in everything I learned through my life and, like, pass it on again. That doesn't mean that that's the same for everybody else. But that was just the right thing for me, and I can't wait for it. I think it's going to be the greatest thing I'll ever do in my life. I'm super excited, and I'm sure we'll do another one of these episodes when the baby comes and we can talk about how sleep deprived I am. And it'll be a reality check, and it'll be great maybe to get another dad on and we can talk about that, because the one thing I am very conscious of, and I can remember one of my best friends when he first became a dad, I messaged him and said, Luke, if you ever want to catch up, mate, you ever want to, like, see me, we can go for a drink or whatever. Once your little boy's born, just let me know. But I know you're going to be busy, so, like, there's no pressure. And he said, actually, mate, I'm going to need to see you. Like, I'm going to need to have that time. It's going to be really important for me in order for me to go back to the family and be the person that I need to be. So, I'm very conscious that I'm going to need to look after my health, but also make sure I set a little bit of time outside for myself with my friends, because that's going to help me, and still make sure that I'm doing the things to look after myself. I think that's really important when you become a dad, because, when you become a parent, all of a sudden your focus is on the child, but you've got to look after yourself to be able to look after your family and your support network. And it was really interesting. I got some great advice the other day from Mark. He's the manager at David Lloyd, and I was chatting to him and he found out that I was going to be a dad. And I said, same thing. I asked him the question while I had the chance. Oh, Mark, what advice would you give me? And I said, like, a couple of my friends, I said, it's really important you take time to yourself. And he said, yeah, that's spot on, mate. He said, the two pieces of advice I'd give you, and I thought these were absolutely brilliant. So I'm going to share them. He said, make sure that when your baby's there and your children are there, and in my case, my son is around, make sure you've always got your partner's back. Never let them see you arguing. You need to always come together as a unit. And I was like, that's a really good piece of advice. And he said the other thing, I had mentioned that my friends had told me it's important to take time for myself. And he said, yeah, that's definitely important, but also make sure you take time for you and your partner. That's really important. So if you ever get offered, any babysitting by your grandparents, take them up on it, because, you and your relationship can get lost sometimes when you start having children, and before you know it, you might have 2 or 3 kids and 10 years have gone by and you're kind of like, whoa, what's happened? And you've become different people. So I thought that was really valuable advice. Super excited. I'm sure, like I said, we'll do some more episodes on this. I've been really enjoying the guest episodes recently. Thank you for listening to them. Thank you to everybody that still listens to the solo ones. Thank you for supporting the podcast. Remember, you can listen to it and download it and watch it on Spotify, Apple, YouTube. Make sure you subscribe if you enjoy it and you appreciate the content. If you could leave a review, that would be massive. But thank you very much, and I will see you in the next episode.